Hey everyone, Sari here, and welcome back to another week of Dark Season defense matches. I didn't change anything for the setup since last week. I'm pretty happy with how things have turned out overall, and I'm probably going to keep this almost exactly the same until the end of the month, when supposedly we'll be getting a new Dark Mythic. I do especially like how well Eldigan has turned out. He's basically immune to isolation from both of its current sources, which makes him extremely useful just as being able to hold down the team as the only dancer. I am thinking about updating Hell's build a bit too. Well, this one's been... it works out pretty well. I think that with Felix covering her from ranged attacks, I might be able to get away with being a bit more experimental. But I don't know if I'm going to commit much to updating her until the end of the month and we see what we get. Overall, the week went really well, actually. It was pretty successful. We had one clean loss, which is always unfortunate to see, but when it's the only 1 out of 10, I think I'm kind of okay with it. I'm considering ways to fix that problem, but again, I don't think I'm going to commit too much to it until the end of the month. So let's get to the first match. This is always a neat way to start the week. They brought what's a pretty classic at this point Brave Hector build with the Mystic Boost, Special Fighter Bonfire, and a Tamari Air for extra support. Peony. Sonya as the bonus unit is fun, and if she doesn't have a particularly exceptional build, I think she's actually really solid, and not the same way that Oliver is. And they just go straight in for it and tell Hector to plunk and tank the world. He comes very close to one-shotting Eliwood even without Bonfire, but he doesn't quite manage it. And gets yoinked forward. And Felix takes the next fight. A little unfortunate that Rajat won't go in here, but that's just because she gets one-shotted where the other ones don't.
Pierce the sky, Maltet!
Nectar does a pretty good job of fighting his way through this, until Hell gets danced, and then she has enough to finish him off. And without Hector, that's enough for them to surrender. This one was a bit of a step up. They brought a pretty much maxed out Norn here. Close Foil and Null Follow-up. Just very solid, honestly. I'm seeing quite a few Norns lately, and it's interesting to see. She's a really capable, colorless, ranged tank. And, yeah, accessible too, since she's a 3 to 4 star unit. They brought Guinevere along too, which is... I'm personally a big fan of Guinevere, but I've been using her with Zelkius. It's interesting to see the two of them put together. They take a few turns just to get in position here. I think they realized that Felix is a bit much for Guinevere to handle. So they end up just trying to leave Norn on the defense tile and go to work from there. I don't know how good of an idea it was to attack into Felix like that though, since all it really does is charge his Bonfire, which he's quite happy to put to use the next turn.
Oops.
And then he gets danced forward and can take down Guinevere as well.
Do I look merry?
Dear brother.
And after it goes to her down, it's enough for them to surrender the match and move on. This was another interesting one to see. I actually think Corrin's a very strong AR tank, when she's in season at least, but I think Renewal might be a mistake as a seal to use for her. Its Mystic Boost is much better overall, and well, Renewal doesn't really do a whole lot when you're trying to tank through a lot of combats in one turn. I think that they were probably planning to use Freya and Corrin as a sort of double tank setup, with Flame helping to just mitigate damage for both of them. And they take a couple of turns just to break structures and move towards the defense tiles. While they don't bother breaking the Panic Manor, they don't actually give Corrin any visible buffs anyway, so the Panic Manor doesn't do a whole lot. Other than stopping them from using those visible buffs. And without them, well,
I take my stand here.
to be fair, Bramament has a lull anyway, so they wouldn't have done a lot for Corrin here. She almost gets to take Bramament out, but it's not quite enough, and Glimmer's enough to finish her off afterwards. Interestingly, we don't get to get a knockout on Flame here, just because Flame isn't debuffed and actually dodges the speed check for Bramament. They decide to keep going here, and Freya can finish Bramament off without any problems. She can't quite just go into Eliwood though, and that's a bit of a problem, especially when she gets panicked before the combat starts as well.
Oh, Freyr.
Which means Eliwood can just finish her off without any issues. And then gets danced. Felix gets to jump forward, pick off Peony. And then Eliwood gets to finish Flame off.
Mother, soon.
Her shot can't actually knock Mila out, just because Mila's very, very bulky. But at this point, they're left with Mila and nothing else, so they're kind of out of options here. They attack into Felix, but I think this is just yeah, we're not winning this one. We'll just make one token attack and finish the match.
Duma.
This was the clean loss of the week, and they had a really impressive team put together for it. This maxed out Norn is probably the most invested one I've seen, with Richard Sky, Times Pulse, Null C, and Bracing Stance. And this Micaiah is equally impressive, honestly. It is a little strange to see two Null C Disrupt ranged tanks in the same team. And I think the other big surprise was that they didn't even bring an Air along. So it's only two Mythics on the team. The near save Gustav is really great for keeping both of their ranged tanks safe from any marauding melee. And yeah, it's a really well-structured team overall, but At the same time, I don't think this is something that I'm going to see very often. Most teams in the vault are using at least 3 mythics. Well, I say most. If they've got a dogger, they're usually going to use at least 3. No. And once they sit up on the defense tile, Eliwood just can't get a lot done for Gustav. And this is where the using only one dancer kind of shows how limiting it can be. If Eliwood had been danced from here, he would have been able to take Peony out, and potentially Gale Forced for another knockout. Sadly, it didn't work out that way. And Norn does a really impressive job of tanking her way through Bramamund and Felix. Felix ends up getting danced and can attack Gustav, but he's not quite able to punch through that. And, well, Hell can't get much done to him at all.
To open the way!
And sadly, Rajat isn't able to speed check Norn. It's part of why I'd like to give her an impact at some point, since the combination of impact and null follow-up means it's extremely hard for anything to actually double her, ever. And from here it's pretty easy for them to just clean things up. Kai actually needs her damage reduction to survive this fight, but she still gets to knock Felix out. And with Felix out of the way, it's easy enough to dance her and get her to finish Eliwood off as well. And then having the second dancer lets them move Norn back onto the defense tile and pick Bramamund off. Eldigan actually does a pretty reasonable job of surviving Gustav here, but it's not like he can actually do damage to Gustav, so it doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. It gives him another turn to pick up the Aether Pot though, and then Dagger can finish off Eldigan.
Smash and bash!
It's always nice to bounce back from a loss with success. This team decided not to use the Bonfire Hector build, and they gave Mystic Boost to Edelgard instead, letting Hector just stick to Aether with his quick riposte from Maltet. They've also got the bonus week Gunthra, who doesn't have her second rank of Chilling Seal yet, and Tamarier to help just sort of debuff everything and mitigate the damage before it happens. This sort of double tank setup is actually, I think it's pretty effective, for the most part. Just because they can cover each other's weaknesses fairly well. They spend a couple of turns breaking the structures and then plonk Edelgard below the fortress to try to bait the ranged. Unfortunately, using Distant Ward means that she can't actually counterattack Felix, and Felix gets danced and can jump over to snipe Gunthra.
Here, take this.
Norm, I'm sorry.
She does get to attack Bramamund, and Bramamund can't finish her off either. So this part of things went sort of according to plan for them. things are a little awkward for them at this point. They decide to keep going, and pull back to try and let Hector tank his way through the remainders. Unfortunately, Hector can't really one-shot Eliwood, and that lets him get dragged forward. And while Rashad can't finish him off,
Your luck's run out.
Aether isn't enough for him to finish her off either, which leaves him extremely exposed to the follow-up. She still can't quite finish him off, but she leaves him low enough that Bremman can move in and clean things up. And from here things are really not looking good for them. They do take down Eliwood, using Peony to soften him up a bit before having Edelgard finish him off.
I'll cut my own path.
But I think at this point it's enough for them to surrender the match and move on. This was another fun one to see. It's interesting to see this many Micaiahs in a week, and this one's basically maxed out. She's really impressive with the double solo and no follow-up. She probably would really like a near-save bodyguard to back this up, but I think the idea here is just to hit and run. And with this peony behind her, she can probably chew through just about anything she runs into. Poor Felix. He's not having a good time with these Micaiahs. They take a few turns just to set up and move into position, picking off all of the relevant structures. I think they ended up realizing they kind of need Peony's extra drives to deal with Felix, though. And once she has them, she doesn't have any problems picking them off without taking a hit. She would have been able to pick him off even without those, but not without taking damage. And once they do that, they retreat as far as they can get. And I think they kind of counted on Eliwood not getting danced here. Unfortunately, the little swap combo means he does. And while he doesn't get to Gale Force, getting that one knockout is enough for them to surrender and move on. This team brought along a kind of a classic combo with Ike and Lucina. It's a pretty maxed out Ike, actually, and really the only reason he's not even more impressive is because they don't have a Dogger, which is fair. She's only been on one banner so far, and she'll become a lot more common, I think, as time goes on. I've got a pretty invested pair of mythics backing them up, though. And bonus week Gunther is solid as well. They decide to go right in for it and just start on the first turn. Shoving Ike all the way in to try and stop anything from going too wrong. Unfortunately, Eliwood just drags him out of the way. and gets danced. And Hell actually gets to have a moment to shine. She can take out Lucina pretty easily, thanks to hitting her res. And with Lucina out of the way, Eliwood has a straight shot forward to take out Peony. And then gets to Gale Force and knock out Gunther as well.
Bjorn, I'm sorry.
Rashad actually gets to do quite a lot here too.
And this.
She can't quite finish Ike off, but she does actually survive his Aether counter, which is good to see. And even though we can't do anything else, it's enough for them to surrender. It's actually been quite a while since I've seen a Layla team, and pairing her with Alina is actually a really interesting idea. Usually, the idea with Layla is to pick something off and then swap a tank in to intercept the rest of the team. This is an interesting spin on that, where it's picking something off with Layla and then using Lilina to double down thanks to the dagger debuffs. They spend a few turns just cleaning up structures and moving into position. And a large part of why I don't think I've seen a whole lot of Laylas is because of Felix. But thanks to their bolt tower, they can actually barely have Lilina finish Felix off. And they actually end up just having to retreat here. I think needing to use Mila to buff Lilina's attack isn't something they were expecting to have to do, and it means they can't really retreat very far.
There's still time.
And since they can't, it's very easy for Eliwood to catch up and pick Lilina off. And even though he can't get anything else, it's enough for them to surrender. This was another one featuring a unit I haven't actually seen much in a while. I think most people at this point look at Felix and decide that Altina's not going to have a good time with him. But I guess some people don't quite understand it yet, so... I do think that this is something you see once and then you kind of understand that this Felix is built to deal with Altina specifically. Oh, and Duolin as well, but they just park Altina right away and say go. Even with Flame behind her, she just doesn't stand a chance. And he gets danced and can jump over Eliwood to pick up a knockout on Flame as well.
Mother, soon.
And with those two down, it's enough for them to surrender. This was a fun way to close the week out. They brought along a Brave Dimitri with a bracing stance and backed up by a Layla again, which is really interesting to see. I've seen more of her in this week than I think I've seen in the last couple of months. The Legendary Eliwood's actually a really great way to just supercharge Dimitri, especially with this ruse. It helps a lot with shutting down threats on the enemy team ahead of time, even though he does have the stance, so I guess it's kind of limited in its usefulness. I think think they were planning to go in on this turn, potentially, but Layla really can't get anything done with Felix guarding the team, so they end up repositioning and aiming for the defense tiles instead. And once they've broken the panic manner and made them a little safer for Dimitri to stand on, they have him move up, ruse the front line, and say go. And Dimitri tanks Eliwood pretty well, but he can't one-shot Eliwood or break through the impact, even with his quick riposte skill. And once he's panicked and dragged out of position,
Out of the way.
even that 40% damage reduction isn't really saving him from Bram.
So this is my punishment.
And then Bram gets danced and can pick Eliwood off as well.
Face the future.
And with those two out of the way, it's enough for him to surrender the match. It was a pretty good week overall. Honestly, I was really happy with the results. Near save armors are still a bit of a problem that I'd like to fix, but I don't think they're common enough that I have to worry too much about it until the end of the month, so that's probably when I'll do most of my major overhauling of the defense. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video, good luck with your own matches, and I'll see you next time.